welcome once again to the SpartanMag.com Recruiting Wrap Podcast. This is Jim Comparoni, publisher of SpartanMag.com, and it's time to talk some college football recruiting with SpartanMag.com recruiting analyst Matt Dorsey. And you can find Matt Dorsey's work with Spartan Magazine, SpartanMag.com, and the Detroit Free Press. And today we have him once again for the Recruiting Wrap, long overdue. Getting ready to talk to some Michigan State football recruiting, because it's hot right now all of a sudden. Michigan State with 3 commitments in the last 15 days since March 16th. Michigan State getting a big one, 4-star recruit out of the Chicagoland area earlier today as we record this. And more to come as Michigan State settles into the spring recruiting season. And Michigan State football, all of a sudden Matt Dorsey's starting to recruit a little bit like the top 10 team they've been, ringing the bell with a 4-star recruit on the last day of March. Matt Dorsey, how you doing, man?
Good. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Now, Matt's audio hookup isn't quite as good as it usually is. He's with us via satellite from Madagascar today. And we're very happy that, I'm joking, he's not in Madagascar. But it's good to have Matt here. Now, Matt, Kevin Jarvis, you had your ear to the ground on this also. When we talked to Edgy Tim earlier, I hope I didn't lose all my material on that interview. It's a good one coming up later. But you had some stuff on Kevin Jarvis earlier in the week. So did Josh Hemholt. There were some indications that commitment watch was in effect for the East Lansing area and Ingham County. And Michigan State went ahead and closed it with Kevin Jarvis after he went back home. So you were not surprised by this. What are your thoughts on the commitment? We'll talk a little bit more about him as a player and what it means in a few minutes. But your initial reaction, Kevin Jarvis, today when you started your day, I think you had an idea this was going to come down today, didn't you?
Well, yeah. There was some signs there. He came back from his Michigan State visit, and he had expressed that he had a great time at Michigan State, and there was some stuff going on in the Twitter sphere out there about from fellow Spartan commitments like Matt Allen and Mike Panashuk and Naquan Jones, who he's friends with and he knows those guys. So there was a sort of a little vibe going on there. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise. I do think it is a very big get for Michigan State to land a 4-star offensive lineman from outside the state of Michigan to start the offensive line class off, because offensive line recruiting is always important. And I can't remember the last time Michigan State got started out an offensive line class with such a high profile out of state offensive line commitment. They've had some good offensive line commitments, but usually they're in-state guys or maybe later in the process. But to start the class off with a 4-star guy from out of the Chicagoland area is a really big get for sure.
And not only is he a 4-star, but he's, right now the state of Illinois has only 5 4-stars for the class of 2017. That number will increase as more scouting is done. But most would agree that he's far and away the number 1 offensive lineman in Illinois. I always kind of make a note of that when we talk about certain individuals, where they rank. I like to see where do they rank at their position in their state. When you go into Illinois and get the state's best offensive lineman, you go into Illinois and get the best defensive end, Josh King, and last year and a couple years ago with Raekwon Williams. You're talking about going into Illinois. They got Raekwon Williams in 2015, 2 straight years going in and getting Illinois' best defensive lineman. And last year, getting the best 3 defensive linemen in the state, marching right back in there and getting their best offensive linemen. And it's not like there's 5 or 6 great offensive linemen in that state. As far as rank, I'm sure there's always, especially at offensive line, sleepers and late bloomers. But if you just want to look at straight rankings, Kevin Jarvis, number 5 player in Illinois, number 1 offensive lineman. The next offensive lineman that shows up is Dalton Wagner. And he's 6'8", 291 out of Richmond, Illinois. And he has offers. He's got an offer from Arkansas and Indiana. Nothing from Michigan State. He's got one from Missouri. Does not have an offer from Northwestern. No offer from Wisconsin. So when you have Northwestern, Wisconsin, Michigan State not offering the second best offensive lineman in the state, then the next one, 6'6", 255, Tyler Jost out of Libertyville. Same thing. MAC offers. Iowa State, Syracuse. Nothing else. Far and away, right now, the best and most hotly recruited, the most sought-after offensive lineman in the land of Lincoln, in Chicagoland, and he's going to Michigan State, continuing Michigan State's success in the state of Illinois. Also continuing the success of Ron Burton, Brad Salem, and the things they're doing, Brad Salem out there in the suburban area. Now, Kevin Jarvis, when you look at him as a player, and when you've talked to people about him, what about him as a player? I look at him, all of his film, he's playing left guard, but he looks like he's got some pretty good lateral movement, and, plays with his feet, with his heel on the ground, with his knees bent, and he reacts inside really quickly to stunts and linebacker blitzes, and is on balance that enables him to change his read in an instant and get there physically to match it and to meet it. And that kind of quickness, that kind of balance could lend itself at 6'5" out to left tackle. We'll get a better read on that when we go to the camps this year. I'm assuming he might show up at the Rivals camp in Columbus later on this spring. Might see him at Michigan State's camp, I'm not sure. But at the least, he's a big road grading left guard. We looked at Michigan State's last game against Alabama. Michigan State unable to get anything going on the ground against Alabama. But nobody gets anything going on the ground against Alabama unless you do some zone read and, get some numbers advantage and some trickery here or there. If you have a quarterback like the Watson kid from Clemson, there are some ways to get it done that way against Alabama, against a dominant defensive line. But Michigan State's way of doing things with the I formation, I don't know if any I formation team could have gotten much going on the ground against that Alabama team last year, Ohio State the year before with some zone read option. But if you're going to have a chance, you need to improve at the offensive guard positions. Michigan State was good at offensive guard last year. Donovan Clark and the true sophomore version of Brian Allen. Those guys are good. Kevin Jarvis comes in bigger than Brian Allen, and a wide body guy that's really got some punch and power to him when I watch him on film. 4-star recruit, that doesn't guarantee it that you can do it, but in terms of Michigan State trying to improve their ability to get in a phone booth and get something done against the best defensive lines, I'm not saying he's definitely the guy that's going to do it, but when you stack your talent pool with guys like this, and there's not many of guys like this in the Midwest or in the country, this is a step in that direction. You want to do this every year. This year they got it done. When you look at him on film, and when you've talked to people about Kevin Jarvis, your thoughts about him as a player?
Yeah, I just think, one is the kid is definitely a massive individual at, 6'5", 315, 320. And for somebody that big, he moves really well, which is good. But I like the fact that, when you watch him on film, he keeps his balance, he keeps his base really well. He doesn't lunge and get himself, a lot of times big guys will sort of have a tendency to lean forward and put their weight on people. He doesn't seem to do that, which is good. So, from that standpoint, I think that lends itself well to his development because he's not a guy who's sitting there and relying on his pure size to sit there and defeat guys, which, like I said, a lot of times big guys can do that. So, watching his film and just the way he keeps his base, and, he obviously has some strength and some punch, which is good to see. And at 315 pounds, he's a big kid that just, you think about what's going to happen to him when he gets in the weight room and really starts hitting it hard. You could have a kid who's just, I don't expect him to be playing much more than the weight he is now, but he could really reshape his body and just, turn into basically a phone booth out there where it's just, or a refrigerator. It's almost hard to get around the guy just because he's so big. I remember watching Mark Staten last year at the Michigan State's camp, and that was one of the things he was talking about, his offensive linemen just staying square to the line and not turning their body, because when you stay square, guys have to run around you, and it takes a lot more time to run around you when you're squared up rather than if you turn sideways. And he said that's one of the things they always work on, is just trying to keep square to the line and force guys to sit there and, have to sit there and go around people. And here's a kid that, you go around him, you're going to be, the play's over by the time you go around him.
Yeah.
So, because he is a big kid.
Absolutely, and he does stay square. He majors in staying square, and a lot of times what they do at Maine South, they've got wide splits on his side of the line, the left side of the line, with a big gap to his right and a big gap to his left, and he's hosted that whole thing. Maybe host is the wrong word, but plays with his heels down, plays with weight on his instep, which are things that they try to teach guys once they get to college. He might be a little bit advanced in that regard, and bends his knees in an instant when he has to. Not a waist bender. He can bend his knees and react to movement, like I said earlier. So he's got some of that reactionary quickness in a phone booth. When he pulls, he raises up okay. Straight line speed is average, something he needs to work on. And when he finds his target at the end of his pull, whether it be on a trap or a power, a lot of times he doesn't get his pads low. He has a little trouble timing that and getting a great shock on somebody when he gets out there. They don't do a lot of that in their offense, and that's something he'll be working on, and I think that he can improve on. Just getting, timing when he gets to that landmark and finishing it, because this is a guy that loves to finish. When he gets into a guy, you've seen it on film, he loves to plant people on their back, and he'll send them clear off the screen and keeps blocking them and block. When he locks into a guy, he's mean about it, and he wants to drive them 1 inch down deep into the dirt, and he gets up happy about it when he does. And also, I saw him go against some big guys here and there on film. Number 68 in one of the rain games. I was going to ask his coach who that was. Number 58 in the white and orange team. This was a rain game that they played at Maine South. But 58 looked like a guy that's at least a MAC player. And Jarvis is a guy that he can bend his knees. He can get low. Does not do it all the time. Allowed 58 to get low and make first contact with him, which is usually the first step toward losing, no matter how good you are, especially against a guy like number 58, whose name I don't know. But 58 got low, first contact, and Jarvis still gave that up and just pressed him off with his arm strength. He says he benches 340. I think he's got some natural strength in there to become a 400-pound bencher quick. Just the way you see him, the way you see people fly off of him when he gets his hands on them. It just slings them aside. You see it on film when he's at left guard and somebody comes in the A-gap to his right and he doesn't have anyone else to block. When he has a chance to go ahead and help the center with a double team, it's usually late because the center's already blocking him. And when he touches the guy, he flattens him. That power, that shock, he has it. It's unmistakable. It's hard to teach that. He's doing it against some guys with some decent size, too. I agree with you. When he gets in the weight room, I think even though he's 6'5", 340 right now, I think he has a high ceiling of potential to converge on, because I think he's got some natural strength to go with what right now is pretty good footwork technique. It's going to be fun to watch him work with Staten this summer at the Michigan State camps. I assume he will be there. He says he benches 340, squats 600, power clean 300 to 315. I'm not sure which of those numbers would indicate that natural strength that we're seeing out of him. I want to ask his coach about that and do some more research on some numbers, see if I find anything. But he plans to finish high school in the spring. He's not going to be a mid-year enroll guy. I saw an interview with him where he said, once you commit to Michigan State, you cannot visit other schools, and I'm fine with that, unquote. In other words, this is something new Michigan State seems to be impressing upon these recruits. There's been 3 commitments so far, and one or two have said, once you commit to Michigan State, you cannot visit other schools. Like Michigan State is saying that as they've said it in the past, but they seem intent on meaning it this time. Now, last year, there was the offensive lineman that visited Ohio State, but the writing was on the wall that once Ohio State offered, he was going to end up there, and Michigan State cut ties with him. There have been others that have decommitted and visited elsewhere, and Michigan State has shown more patience with others. It might depend on how good the player is and how rare a find he is, but they're trying to set that in the minds of these players right now. And this guy, Kevin Jarvis, he was interested in Florida. He was interested in Michigan. He got offers from those schools. He did not take visits to Florida. I don't know if he did with Michigan or not, unofficially. You may know that. But didn't need to look any farther. He saw everything he wanted out of Michigan State. And a guy committing in March with all that interest might be someone that would be prone to opening it back up at some point and visiting later other schools, although Michigan State has not had a problem with that by and large over the last few years. And this would be a guy that would have every reason to go check out some other schools because he's got some big-time offers. But he's saying once you get to commit to Michigan State, you cannot visit other schools. So that's coming from the coaches. Matt, your thoughts on that? Do you think Michigan State can effectively now tell recruits that, hey, if you're committing, that's it. You can't commit another school. You can't visit another school. They've said that in the past, but it's my read they're coming even harder with that mantra and that philosophy with these guys, starting with this 4-star commitment out of Illinois. What you got to read on that at all?
Well, I think that, I mean, it depends on the kid. I mean, obviously they're telling kids that, hey, if you commit to us, we don't want you taking this any place else, and they're pressing that upon recruits. I mean, a guy like, there's kids that want to drag the process out, and there's kids that, want to sit there and take 5 visits and do a hat dance and all that other type of stuff. And then there's kids that, want to get the decision over so they can sit there and focus on their senior year and focus on, their school and all that other type of stuff. And, and I think there's both types of kids. And I think that, what Michigan State's doing, I think is smart. If you're a kid, like Jarvis that wants ready to make a commitment, doesn't really care for all the recruiting hype and hoopla and stuff like that, then it's fine. On the other hand, if you're somebody who goes out and wants to take the visits and everything, then it's a situation where Michigan State might be better off saying, hey, look, we want you, but, unless you're going to commit to us and make a commitment, 100%, if you want to visit other schools, you can sit there and, take your time. And, Mark D'Antonio has always been one of those people that's told kids to go visit other schools, take their time if they want to do that, because he's confident in what Michigan State has to offer, and he's confident that if it was meant to be, it was meant to be. So, I don't think it's going to affect Michigan State too much. I mean, like I said, last year there was the one situation you had with, the kid Gavin Cupp, who still insists that he had no desire of committing to Ohio State, and all the updates that he was solid to Michigan State and and had no desire until Michigan State pulled his commitment. But then why do you go to the Ohio State camp in the first place? He said because he wanted to prove to people that he could get an Ohio State offer. Well, you got a Michigan State offer and you're committed to them. I don't understand what you have to prove. So, but I don't think it'll affect Michigan State that much, just because I think that, that's always been, I mean, Michigan State's kind of always done that. And if you get a kid that, wants to commit and says, hey, I'm going to sit there and I want to take other visits, I think Mark D'Antonio is probably going to sit there and say, well, look, I'm not going to accept your commitment. So there might be kids that at some point in time commit to Michigan State, and we don't hear about it because Michigan State says, no, we're not going to accept your commitment right now because you're going to go visit other schools and you need to do that, and we're going to still be here for you. And down the line, if you want to commit to us and you're not going to visit other schools, that's fine. So, but I don't think it's going to affect Michigan State recruiting in a negative aspect, at all.
Do you think these kids will listen to that? Do you think? I mean, this kid sounds like he means it. He's not going to visit anywhere else. He might not be the personality type that would want to. And Michigan State has tried to get guys to not visit, and it's not been a big problem in the past. But do you think this will work for Michigan State? I'm not asking if it'll hurt Michigan State, but do you think it'll work that recruits who might be inclined to visit elsewhere might be less inclined because Michigan State's being hardline about this? I just wonder.
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think if you commit to a school, I mean, whether it's Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State, Notre Dame, if you commit to a school, they don't expect you to visit other schools. That's just the way it is. And I think Michigan State's just this is becoming a little bit more public because of all the shenanigans going on down in Ann Arbor and with some of these SEC schools and things like that. But I mean, for the most part, I mean, when kids are committed to certain schools, they don't go and visit other schools, and I think that's sort of I mean, when you commit to Wisconsin, they expect you to not visit any place else except Wisconsin. And I think that's what Mark D'Antonio is just sort of impressing upon kids.
I don't remember ever seeing the recruit say that when you commit to Michigan State, you can't visit anywhere else. The language just struck me as a little more stronger and a little bit more of an edict these days than it's been in the past. We'll have to wait and see what it means down the road. Now, as far as recruiting, did you have a closing thought on that before I move on to other visits coming up this week?
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, like I said, I just think it's a great get for Michigan State starting the class off. And to tell you the truth, I'm really impressed with all three of the guys that they've gotten. I'm a big fan of Cody White, the wide receiver. And, obviously Camper, the tight end out of IMG, seems like a really athletic kid that they've had their eye on for a long time. So, I think Michigan State's off to a really solid start to this class. And I think that things are, they've done a really good job of getting a lot of kids on campus this spring. And, I kind of heard through some contacts that, I don't think D'Antonio was, I mean, he loves the class of 2017, don't get me wrong, or 2016. But I don't think he was thrilled at how things ended up. Michigan State had 20 commitments, by September. And, then all of a sudden, they kind of strike out with some guys down the end. And there's nothing wrong with striking out with guys. I mean, it's recruiting. That happens. But you need to be in on enough guys that even if you strike out, you still get other good players. And I think that was sort of what I had kind of heard, that, D'Antonio was a little bit, I just thought that maybe they should have been in on some more elite players. And I think that some of the people just sort of assume that, hey, we got 20 commitments, we only got 2 or 3 spots left. This is going to be a piece of cake. We're going to go out and win a bunch of games. And, you still have to do the work. That's the thing. So I think that they've gone out this spring, and I think the staff's doing a really good job of getting kids on campus. And because in the end, that's what's going to sell kids, getting them on campus. So, I think from that standpoint, it doesn't surprise me that, I think they're off to being a little bit more proactive as far as getting some of these kids on campus and letting the school sell itself, because it will sell itself if you get kids on campus enough.
All right, today, Malik Vann, defensive end out of Fairfield, Ohio, 6'3", 245. Michigan State offered him today. He now has offers from Cincinnati, Maryland, Louisville, Pittsburgh, Michigan State, West Virginia, Kentucky. Not a guy that, as far as the Rivals.com rankings goes, not a guy that's I don't know if he's registered as a 3-star right now or not, but those are some good offers: West Virginia, Kentucky, Louisville, Maryland, Cincinnati. But Michigan State gives him a new level of offer, a different level. No disrespect to Louisville; they've won a lot of games in recent years, but the Michigan State offer there in Ohio, that's a big one. Malik Vann, defensive end, Fairfield. Matt, your thoughts on that one?
Well, he's a 2018 kid.
Okay.
So I mean, those are great offers for somebody who's 2018. This early in the process to have those type of offers. I mean, the only kids, I guess the only way it would be any better is if, he had like an Ohio State offer pretty much. And, if you have an Ohio State offer, and you're a 2018 kid right now, you're probably a top 100 kid.
Yeah.
To have those offers already, and for Michigan State to get in there and get the offer ahead of Ohio State, because it looks like, based on his offers, that, going to be somebody who's seriously on Ohio State's radar. So the fact that Michigan State's gotten in on this early, should be able to help pay some dividends. If Ohio State does offer them, we were in on you before Ohio State was. On the other hand, if Ohio State doesn't offer, then Michigan State would be sitting in a pretty strong position, considering they offered him early in the process, as well as the fact that Coach Barnett, the defensive coordinator, actually is his primary recruiter. So I think that never hurts, because I think he does a really nice job with kids down in the Cincinnati area, and Fairfield is right down just north of Cincinnati.
And he was here, I think his teammate Jack Carmen out of Fairfield, also a 2018, and he visited. And I'm not sure if Michigan State's offered yet, but Michigan apparently offered Jack Carmen back in October, along with Vanderbilt and Iowa, for what that's worth. So Michigan State busy with some of these 2018s.
Yeah, Jackson Carmen, Jim, he does have a Michigan State offer. He's been offered by everybody in the country.
Okay.
So, he's probably the top player in Ohio for 2018.
All right.
He has offers from pretty much everybody. 6'6", 270-pound offensive tackle, and so he's basically considered. He's a what I would say is sort of a top 100 elite level offensive line recruit that pretty much everybody's after. So Michigan State obviously with Carmen and and Van, they're going to be spending a lot of time obviously down in Fairfield, checking things out down there, and which is good. I mean, that just gives them more reason to be down there. And Michigan State, like I said, has a good reputation in the area. So I expect that there'll definitely be a player for Van for sure. Obviously Carmen might be a little bit more difficult to see what happens there as far as Ohio State and everything. But either way, Michigan State will probably be. Coach Barnett will be stopping in during the May evaluation period. He'll try to get those kids on campus in the summertime, and then getting them up for a game. Which, considering Ohio State comes to East Lansing this year, it makes sense to get those Ohio kids up to East Lansing. Because there's a good chance that, if Michigan State goes out and beats Ohio State, that'll be 3 out of the last 5. D'Antonio will have a winning record against Meyer. And so there could be a really strong pull for Ohio kids to Michigan State.
And sticking with the juniors, 2018s, Justin Adam Alola, 6'3", 234, linebacker, St. Peter's Prep out of New Jersey, I think. Mark Snyder, the principal recruiter there for Michigan State. I think he visited also today. He's got offers from Michigan State, Auburn, Penn State, Rutgers, Virginia. I think you previewed him on the message board the day before the visit. So 2018's Michigan State with some big-timers today with Van, Carmen, and Adam Alola. Your thoughts on Adam Alola?
Well, they're twin brothers, actually. So there's Justin and Jason, and they both have just extensive offer lists. One's a linebacker, and sort of a big linebacker, and one's a defensive lineman. So one's a little bit bigger than the other one. So they're both they're at St. Peter's Prep, which is a really good school, and Michigan State's betting on some kid from St. Peter's Prep over the years, but they've never landed a kid from there. Of course, that was when Pat Narduzzi was recruiting there, and that's one of the things you look at last year's class. Michigan State started off getting Cam Chambers from New Jersey, an early commitment, and then they never really got anybody else in New Jersey the rest of the way. And I think there was a little bit of a sort of a lag there after Pat Narduzzi left. So it's good to see them getting back in New Jersey because New Jersey kids are there's tons of talent there, and they're not going to go to Rutgers. I mean, until Rutgers can get their act together and prove that they're going to be a consistent winner. There's plenty of kids to be had in the state of New Jersey, and who knows what's going to happen with Penn State and James Franklin. So Michigan State could definitely be a player in New Jersey, this year as well as next year. So good job of getting these kids on campus, and St. Peter's Prep is it's kind of like a Brother Rice type of school out there in New Jersey that has a lot of kids. Year in and year out, there's always going to be kids there. So. I expect Ron Burton's messed around on the East Coast as well, so he'll probably be stopping into St. Peter's Prep as well, which never hurts because I think Ron Burton does an excellent job, especially when it's recruiting guys that he would be the position coach for.
On Tuesday, Michigan State had visits from 3 4-star recruits. Kevin Jarvis, and ended up getting a commitment from him 48 hours later, but also KJ Hamler, wide receiver from Orchard Lake St. Mary's. Not a 4-star in the Rivals rankings right now, but might become one. And James Hudson out of Ohio, a Kentucky commitment. Hamler, saw an interview with him with Josh Hemholt at, I think, the Chicago event last weekend, saying a lot of good things about Michigan State. He's not the little kid he used to be when he got that Michigan State offer that really rocked his world back when he was a youngster, but now he's kind of a veteran of the recruiting circuit, wants to go out west, I think, and take some visits. So KJ Hamler on campus again. I think you exchanged some texts with him. What are your thoughts? What's your read on Hamler right now? He's camped at Michigan State in the past. He's done really well at the T-shirt and underwear camps over the years. Very hard to guard in a non-padded situation. I think he's got skills that will translate well when pads are on as a specialized type of receiver. But Michigan State seemed to have an early lead with Hamler a long time ago. Now they're having to fend some others off. I think he has special speed. There's fast wide receivers, there's good wide receivers, and then there's those Calvin Ridley type of speed guys. I don't know if Hamler's quite there, but he's not far behind. First time we saw him at Michigan State camp, I think what I said to you about KJ Hamler was that he had LSU speed is the way I said it, and everybody else has figured that out in the meantime. But just your thoughts on Hamler being in here for a visit, saying what I perceive to be all the right things about Michigan State, but this one's going to be a tough chase, I would think. What are your thoughts about Hamler right now, where that one stands at the moment?
Yeah, he told me that he had a really good time visiting Michigan State, and he got a better idea of how they said they would use them, and he sent me a text talking about how they said they would use them on special teams, they would use them at the X and the Y position, a little bit of both. So, that's their thought process on KJ Hamler. And, it's one of those situations where I know he's getting some pressure from some teams to play in a spread offense because he's a little bit of a smaller guy. Like you said, he does have, sort of a, special speed. And, he's one of those guys that when we've gone to camps and combines, when he walks up there, DBs, don't want to walk out there and cover him. I mean, just because they know they can't do anything to look good. If they go press coverage up tight, he can run right by him. And of course, if they give him a real soft cushion, then he'll just sit there and, he'll do a quick slant and, and then, they have to deal with that. So, he's one of those guys that it's fun to watch him at camps because people actually avoid him on purpose because of his talent. And it has shown playing for Orchard Lake St. Mary's. If you saw, if anybody hasn't seen the highlight, I think he had pretty much the highlight of the year last year, besides Donnie Corley's touchdown catch. He had a highlight that I think lasted about a minute almost, or some ridiculous amount, where he was returning some punt, and he must have faked out the whole team on the opposite team twice, returning the punt for a touchdown. So if you get a chance, Jim, and people on SpartanMag, you can just go to YouTube and check that out. The KJ Hamler return, and like I said, it was ridiculous how long it actually took. And but yeah, I think his skills translate really well. The McGarrett Kings, Keyshawn Martin weren't the biggest guys. I mean, Keyshawn Martin was never really physical, and you saw the type of role he was able to have at Michigan State. So I think Hamler could do the same thing. The interesting thing is from Michigan State's perspective is there's a lot of good wide receivers out there, and I think in the end they'll take three. They definitely want to take at least two, but I think they'll take three if they can get the right guys. And you have Hunter Rison's out there, Danny Davis out of Ohio, who's an impossible guy to reach. But from what I've been told, Danny Davis is basically looking at it's Michigan State and Penn State. Those are his top two teams. Now Danny Davis has a ton of offers, except he doesn't have an offer from Ohio State. And so Ohio State is really focused on the Jalen Harris kid, and they're also after Donovan Peoples-Jones. So it doesn't look like Davis is going to get an offer from Ohio State, but he's a dynamic wide receiver as well. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out with all these guys, because it might be a situation where once Michigan State gets certain guys, they might be done at the position. So Hamler's a guy that Michigan State looked like they were the leader for, and I still think they're in really good shape for him. I think if he was going to decide right now, it'd probably be Michigan State, but then again, he's not ready to decide now, and he's going to take other visits, and he wants to get back out to Penn State. He wants to check out some schools out west and things like that. So a lot of things can change between now and then for him, and as well for Michigan State.
What about James Hudson, the kid out of Ohio that's committed to Kentucky, defensive lineman, been committed to Kentucky for a long time, out of Toledo Central Catholic? He was on campus on Tuesday, like you said he would be. I happened to watch him. I observed him while he was watching practice. He was there with his mother and I think his dad, and had his varsity jacket on. And Messiah DeWeaver was taking the field for practice, and he went by James Hudson, and they kind of caught each other's eyes and just kind of stopped and shook hands, and they were talking a little bit. And I was going from one end of the field to the other with my camera, trying to get some video of what was going on the field. And I overheard James Hudson say something to Messiah DeWeaver along the lines of, "Yeah, I thought you'd remember me." I think they must have played each other, might have even come into contact on the field a little bit. But they were all smiles at that particular juncture. And he's a 4-star, ranked number 7 in the state, number 211 in the country, committed to Kentucky. I'm not sure when he committed, but because he's a commitment to Kentucky, I think he might be kind of clamping things down recruiting-wise in terms of talking to media right now. Matt, is that my read? What are your thoughts on James Hudson coming in for that visit? What do you think's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a guy that Kentucky's done a really good job of recruiting the state of Ohio. What they did is they got Vince Morrow when Stoops came over to Kentucky. He took Vince Morrow with him, and Vince Morrow was the guy who was at Nebraska when Nebraska was getting those guys out of Ohio a couple years ago with Pelini. It was Vince Morrow who was doing it, and so he's the point man for pretty much all the kids in Ohio for Kentucky, and he does a really good job. I mean, he's their top recruiter. I think he also kind of tries to sort of pressure kids into early commitments. And that's kind of been the case, and that's why some kids have actually flipped. Obviously, the Dowell twins flipped to Michigan State. There's been some other kids that have actually flipped from Kentucky to Ohio State. Kentucky just tries to get in these kids so early, and for the most part, most of the kids that Kentucky's getting, in my opinion, are guys that if Ohio State and Michigan State don't want them, I don't know how you're going to compete in the SEC with those type of kids. Hudson would be the exception, though, because he's a legit prospect, and Kentucky got in on him early, was able to sort of get him on campus, clamp down, get a commitment from him, and now all of a sudden his stock is sort of really taken off, and Michigan State's after him. So, I think it'll be interesting. Michigan State, he's a Toledo kid, and Toledo's a lot closer to. I timed it out the other day. Toledo's an hour and 45 minutes from East Lansing. Yeah. It's 5 hours, I think, about 5 hours to Lexington. So there is about a 3-hour time difference there. If he's a Cincinnati kid, it's a little bit different, but he's a Toledo kid. And, and so I think that, it's real easy to get him back on campus frequently because he can just jump in the car and be up at Michigan State for a spring game, be up at Michigan State for a camp session or whatever it is. So I expect Michigan State will sort of really keep the heat on him, so to speak, and try to get him on campus as much as possible. So, it'll be interesting to see if Kentucky can hold on to this one.
Later on in this podcast, we talked to Tim O'Halloran about Michigan State's success in Illinois and how the Chicago area used to be a blind spot for Michigan State recruiting in the past. And you and I have talked about that in the past also. It was a regular subject matter, topic of conversation over the years, and Michigan State certainly has changed that. Toledo has been a little bit of a blind spot for Michigan State too, considering, like you said, it's less than 2 hours away. There's been some players that have come from Toledo to Michigan State. I can think of a kicker maybe here and there. I think Sean Mason might have been from Toledo, but not a ton. Mike Tressel is the primary recruiter down there, and I've spoken with him a little bit about recruiting in Toledo, and he says, for the best ones, it's a blue area. I mean, they love the Wolverines down there, but it's not like Michigan's been knocking them dead in Toledo recently either. They get them out of there when they can. I'm not sure if that's in the past, maybe Michigan State has had trouble with the blue wall down there, but that doesn't exist in Toledo anymore. And like you said, less than 2 hours away. As a matter of fact, Matt, a lot of times I fly out of the Toledo airport. A lot of times there's good deals out of that airport, and it's only maybe 30 minutes farther than going to Detroit Metro. So for 30 more minutes, you save $100 to fly out, and plus it's convenient to fly out of Toledo. My point is, it's not far away. It might as well be in the state of Michigan. So not only is he close compared to Lexington, if he's equally comfortable with both, and also Michigan State, a defensive end, is needing to reboot there a little bit. With Shalik Calhoun having moved on, yeah, there's some guys in the program with some good talent, but no names on that roster, if you are James Hudson, that make you stop and say, man, they're loaded there. I don't know when I'll get on the field there. That's not existing right now. There's a line of players there trying to prove themselves, but right now, nothing to scare him away from that. Thirdly, and also important, is if you like both schools the same, hey, when Kentucky goes on the road, they're going to Baton Rouge. They're going to Stark Vegas. They're going to Gainesville. They're going to Columbia, South Carolina. If you commit to Kentucky, that's hard for mom and dad to go visit there. And we, like I said, we saw them at Michigan State's practice this week. They're involved. They're going to want to go. It's a big difference going to those, getting in a car and going to those places, as opposed to going to Ann Arbor for a road game, to Columbus for a road game, to Penn State for a road game, or the easy drive to Indiana, Purdue from Toledo. In terms of being able to watch road games, that's a different story also. So I can see why that would be attractive to James Hudson. And are you getting any read on? Is he keeping things quiet right now? What's do you get any idea what he might be thinking camp wise? Have you seen anything from him after the visit, or what's?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything, and I'll sit there and try to get my ear to the ground and see if I can't find out a little bit more. I mean, I know Kentucky will probably sit there and work real hard to get him back on campus again as soon as possible. I mean, I give Kentucky credit. They are tuned into these types of things. And, so, I mean, the fact that he visited Michigan State, I can guarantee you that they're going to try to get him down there as soon as possible and sort of reaffirm that commitment that he has to them and why he picked them in the first place and things like that. So, but from Michigan State's standpoint, like you said, Toledo has been an area that is, it's a little bit strange. I mean, Toledo, has, and especially that school, Toledo Central Catholic, has had some decent players. I think the kid who's the quarterback at Notre Dame came out of there. And Michigan State was really Deshaun Kaiser, I believe. Yeah. Michigan State was really involved with him, and I think they had a really good shot at him for a little while. And then Michigan State took the commitment. Who was the kid they took the commitment from? And then he flipped around and decided he didn't want to come to Michigan State because he was worried about Durkin.
Durkin.
Yeah, Durkin. And so, and what happened is once Durkin had popped to Michigan State was out of the race for Kaiser, and Kaiser ended up going to Notre Dame. Not that Michigan State would have got him necessarily anyway, but that's a guy that Michigan State was definitely in the mix for. So that's a good program that he's at, and Michigan State's able to get a kid from there. Could pay future dividends as well. So that'll be something to watch. And you make a great point. I mean, the years Toledo had that sort of blue, it was like, hey, you got kids from Ohio there, and they're going to be Ohio State kids. The kids that aren't Ohio State kids are going to be Michigan kids. So it was sort of a difficult area for Michigan State or any team. And I'm thinking Demario Suggs might have been from Toledo.
Yeah, he was.
So that's the last Toledo kid I can think of, so to speak, besides, like you said, a kicker or punter, something like that. So
now, as far as you mentioned, Notre Dame getting Kaiser. I posted something on the board earlier tonight about all of a sudden Notre Dame hired a new defensive line coach who had been with Brian Kelly in the past. I think Gilmore's his last name. He'd coached with Brian Kelly at Grand Valley State and Central Michigan and Cincinnati. He left Cincinnati to become defensive line coach at Illinois. He was defensive line coach at Illinois when they had Corey Legit and some of those guys. Clay Nurse had a good defensive line. Team wasn't very good, but D-line was good. He left Illinois to go to North Carolina for a couple years. Now he's hooked back up with Brian Kelly. He was hired, I think, earlier this month or last month, and he has Detroit connections. And there's a story on the NotreDameRivals.com site with talking about Donovan Peoples-Jones going to be visiting there April 14th. The wide receiver from Cass Tech, super prospect, size, speed, big timer. Everybody wants him, of course, but he'll be visiting there. And also, who's the other guy? The other hyphenated?
Kelly Powell.
Yeah. So Notre Dame's always been a strong recruiter. I think it's interesting in the Great Lakes area in the state of Michigan. I just think it's interesting that all of a sudden they've hired a guy that might give them a little more power. And going into Cass Tech with Kelly Powell and Peoples-Jones. Peoples-Jones has come to Michigan State. It's always been a hard read to see exactly what he thinks about Michigan State. For some reason, I think Michigan State's going to have a hard time getting him. Kelly Powell's cousins with Ambry Thomas. But Notre Dame has been good in the past. That hire could make them a little bit better. Of course, you're going to have high-end recruits visiting Notre Dame. But Peoples-Jones, Notre Dame, that looks like that might be a serious one for Michigan State to try to beat for Peoples-Jones as Notre Dame. You get any read on either of those two, Notre Dame recruiting in the state of Michigan with those two or others?
Well, Peoples-Jones, I believe his father also did his grad school work, I believe, at the University of Michigan. So there's that connection as well. So, I've always thought that Peoples-Jones was going to be one that was going to be difficult. I didn't think not that I think the Michigan State doesn't have a chance, I just thought that it was going to be a tough recruitment to land him. With that being said, something that we talked a little bit about on the message board, which I think was a smart move from Michigan State's perspective, is, and I think you saw it, that they hired a new recruiting coordinator, which was Butler Benton, out of a former Cincinnati football player, Detroit King product, and just a really, really impressive resume. The guy was a really good student at King as well as Cincinnati, and he's been down at the University of New Orleans doing stuff, and he's now on staff at Michigan State. So Michigan State just added another guy, to the recruiting staff that is from Detroit. He's young. He's a former Division I football player. He's got a good reputation in the city. He's a guy that's high character, stresses academics. Didn't get a lot of play, so to speak. As far as, you didn't hear or see stories in the newspaper and things about it. But I think it was a pretty solid hire from Michigan State's perspective, and I think that's going to help pay dividends down the road. A lot of people think that Curtis Blackwell's been the recruiting coordinator, but he's actually not. So now they have a young, energetic, guy that obviously knows D'Antonio from his days in Cincinnati, who's from Detroit, who's going to be helping with recruiting. So I think that can really help Michigan State as far as with kids from down in Detroit area.
At Michigan State's practice on Thursday, the quarterback from Washington, D.C., St. John's High School, is it Kasim Hill or Kasim Hill? I'm not sure, but he visited.
I'm going to go with Kasim Hill.
Yeah, 6'2", 220, number 242 in the country, number 12 pro-style quarterback by Rivals.com. He's a guy that's been on the radar for Michigan State for almost a year, maybe even longer. A guy that our subscribers on SpartanMag.com have heard of. All kinds of offers: Maryland, Michigan State, Nebraska, Northwestern, Penn State. He's always had an interest level in Michigan State. Ron Burton, busy down there. He visited. That's an interesting one. Friday, Ricky Lombardi's coming in. You've had some analysis of him. 6'3", maybe 220. West Des Moines, Iowa. Offers from Iowa, Iowa State, Michigan State. I think he was expecting offers from the Cyclones and Hawkeyes. I think the Michigan State offer really kind of fluffed his pillows a little bit. 21 touchdown passes last year, 5 interceptions, 2,200 yards as a junior. Camped at Michigan State last summer. Visited Michigan State for the Oregon game last fall. So back-to-back interesting quarterbacks in the class of 2017. Your thoughts on both of those and quarterback recruiting right now for Michigan State?
Yeah, I think things have really picked up. Kasim Hill had an offer from Michigan State early on. I think he actually went to Michigan State's camp like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that was where they got in on him early. And for a while there, he was really listing Michigan State prominently. I called him up and spoke with him once or twice, probably within last fall. And I don't want to say the interest had waned, but he wasn't hearing as much from Michigan State, and he was sort of talking to a lot of other schools. And now it seems like things have really picked up with him again with Michigan State. And a lot of it has to do with not only what Michigan State's looking for, but other schools as far as their quarterback situation. Penn State has a quarterback commitment for the class of 2017. Michigan has a quarterback commitment for 2017. Ohio State has a quarterback commitment for 2017. So a lot of the bigger schools, Virginia Tech, who would be a school that a guy from Washington, D.C. would probably be interested in, they just picked up a commitment for the class of 2017. So all of a sudden, you get a situation where there's a lot of guys that are sort of falling by the wayside. Rocky Lombardi on the other side, obviously Iowa was a school. Wisconsin was a school that he was looking at. Wisconsin just got a really impressive quarterback commitment, a kid that I actually really liked out of New York. And he's a 4-star quarterback, and he committed to Wisconsin last week. Really good get for the Badgers. So, it's one of those things where all of a sudden you have Rocky Lombardi and Kasim Hill, two of the higher rated guys that are still out there, pro-style guys, and you have a program like Michigan State that, sort of fits what the type of style quarterback they are. And Michigan State's getting both those guys on campus within a matter of 2 days. So, you could definitely see something happening if one of these kids decides that, they want that Michigan State offer. They might have to sit there and jump at it relatively quickly if that's the case. But, two really good prospects if you watch them on film. They bring a lot to the table, and coming off of Messiah DeWeaver, following those guys up or following him up, whether it was Kasim Hill or Rocky Lombardi, I don't think you could sit there and complain about either, because I think they both are athletic, pro-style guys, which is what Michigan State sort of focused on the last couple of years.
And guys that Michigan State has a thick book on. Like you said, both of these guys have camped at Michigan State. Michigan State knows them well. There's no guesswork here. Michigan State knows what they are recruiting. Friday, Hunter Rison, former Michigan State commitment, scheduled to come back in for a Michigan State visit. Also hearing Tyler Beach is going to come in later in April. I think he's going to Northwestern April 8th, Michigan State April 16th. Michigan State beginning to capitalize on some of these spring days. They're going to get outside a little bit more. I think the weather's going to clear up. Michigan State, starting tomorrow, has 3 more solid weeks of spring practice. That's one of the advantages of having your spring game later. I think it might be a little bit easier to get visits from some of these guys as they have their spring breaks later in the year. If you have your spring game earlier, like Michigan this weekend, Michigan does a good job with recruiting. They don't need any help. But I think Michigan State is going to be able to monopolize the visit opportunities here for the next 3 weeks, especially spring break week. And spring break week is a different week for different kids at different schools. That's why right now you're having New Jersey kids coming in. Obviously, it's spring break for them. Illinois kids coming in. There'll be more Illinois kids next week, I think. Michigan State with 3 commitments right now since March 16th. I think they're going to get a chance to get some more. Whether or not they want to finish with some guys, that remains to be seen. But Michigan State, with the success they've had on the field recently, and the spring visits are attractive for Michigan State right now. It's a cool place to visit, and they're getting a lot out of this. And Hunter Rison's been here before, and things are kind of in bloom for Michigan State right now. I make the comparison. I had the name here a minute ago, but there was the kid from, remember back when Brady Hoke had that real good recruiting year? a few years back, and everybody, Michigan State fans were panicking because they weren't getting any recruits. And there was one 4-star offensive lineman from Illinois, and Michigan State thought they were in on him. He visited Michigan. He got the gun to the head treatment down there and committed before he left campus. And he committed to Michigan really before Michigan State really got out of the starters block in that recruitment. I can't think of what his name is. I don't know if he's done much. I can't remember if he's one of the guys that hasn't done much since
I think he's
then.
one of the guys that actually left Michigan, I'm pretty sure.
Was it Bosch, maybe? Or something?
Bosch, yeah, I think, yeah.
But in terms of recruiting pull, I mean, Michigan was getting guys before Michigan State was out of those starters blocks, and that was, before Michigan State started to win, before Michigan State hired Blackwell, before Michigan State and Mark D'Antonio started to put more emphasis on spring recruiting. And you fast forward to now, 2016, Michigan State goes down to Illinois, gets the one and only blue chipper offensive lineman in that state at this time of year. Spring recruiting for Michigan State strong, running unopposed right now. I was at practice on Tuesday, and Curtis Blackwell says that he wants to get the top players in the state of Michigan to have their first campus experience to be a visit to Michigan State. And his philosophy is, and it's been his experience over the years as he put together some of those summer league teams and other camps and so forth, is the guys that are the best players in the city and the state when they're 7th and 8th graders, they're still the best guys when they're 11th and 12th graders. There are some exceptions, but when he and his contacts can identify people as the best 7th and 8th graders, he's not shy about getting them on campus. And Matt, I saw it on Tuesday. I saw some young kids with name tags that don't need to be publicized right now. Some young guys going to practice. And Michigan State's got 3 more weeks of this. And those young guys are going to be rubbing elbows tomorrow with Hunter Rison and guys like this. Your thoughts on Rison, your thoughts on Michigan State spring recruiting. And although it's not like Michigan State is like knocking everything dead, but there is a bloom on Michigan State spring recruiting, unlike in past years. It has changed along with Michigan State's overall programming having changed as well. And you're seeing it in spring recruiting right now. Your thoughts on Rison, your thoughts on spring recruiting, and we'll go ahead and wrap this one up.
Rison's a guy with, obviously when they're committed to Michigan State, then opens things back up. And some people thought that was like an indictment against Michigan State. And what it was more than anything is, I think a sort of respect by Rison, to not go out and be visiting other schools while he's committed to Michigan State. So I think that, and that's the whole point. Rison opening his recruitment back up wasn't anything against Michigan State. It was the fact that he wanted to sit there and be able to go to Alabama or go to USC or some of these other schools, check them out, find out if they were going to offer him, which most of them would and did offer him. And then he can also, sort of keep looking at Michigan State. So he didn't want to burn any bridges there. So it was a very, sort of amenable situation, Rison's decommitment from Michigan State. So, he set a commitment date as being April 10th. And, and all of a sudden there was a bunch of buzz how he's supposed to go down to Oklahoma, I think April 7th, 8th, and 9th or something like that, or 7th and 8th to go down and check out Oklahoma. And everybody thought, all of a sudden there's been all this speculation that, he's Oklahoma's to lose. Then again, Oklahoma has just picked up, I think, 3 wide receiver commitments in the last week. So it's in, I don't know what's going on down in Oklahoma. Having him back on campus, I think, is always a good thing. Hunter has a really good relationship with a lot of the guys that signed in the class of 2017, specifically guys like Donnie Corley and Messiah DeWeaver. He's good friends with Tristan Jackson, who's coming up, and he hung out with those guys last year, and I think just getting up on campus and hanging around those guys will never hurts Michigan State's chances. So, I don't want to sit there and say he's Michigan State's to lose, but I think that while some people are sitting there trending, saying he's definitely going to Oklahoma, I still think Michigan State, is in the mix for Hunter Rison. And to tell you the truth, even if he were to commit to Oklahoma, I don't think his recruitment necessarily would be over. I think it's a situation where, he's so close to Michigan State and he's got such good ties to the program and he's 45 minutes away that, just getting up on campus and coming up to visit, even if he were to commit to Oklahoma, all of a sudden he wants to come up and, check out a practice, because Tristan Jackson and Donnie Corley invite him up, or comes up to spend a weekend because some of his friends are going to be up there and things like that. So I mean, even if he were to commit someplace else, I still think that Michigan State would be a potential destination for him before all is said and done. Just because I think he has, if he were to select someplace else, some people would think that he doesn't like Michigan State, and I think it would be a situation where it's not that he doesn't like Michigan State. Sometimes you just like another place a little bit better. Sometimes, it's that old adage about ice cream. Sometimes you like, everybody likes vanilla ice cream and everybody likes strawberry, but some people like strawberry a little bit better than vanilla. If they choose strawberry, it doesn't mean they don't like vanilla. And I think that would be the case with Hunter Rising. But I think tomorrow's visit could go a long way to sort of, if he's going to decide on April 10th, to see where that actually stands. As far as the young guys, like I said, you're right. Curtis Blackwell does a really good job of identifying a lot of these young kids. He's got a lot of stuff with his, sound mind, sound body contacts and the Police Athletic League down in Detroit. And so, a lot of these kids, he knows who they are early on. And, I think you make a good point. A lot of these kids that if they're a stud in 7th or 8th grade, there's a good chance that, that's going to continue on throughout the time period. I'm sure Jalen Smith was probably an awesome 8th grader. In fact, I'm positive he probably was. So, and they have a whole system, Michigan State does, and Coach Blackwell does, about sort of getting kids on campus. It's like a 6-prong thing. Like first they want to get kids, up to a game. And then once they get them to a football game, their plan is to get them to a basketball game. And then when they get them to a basketball game, they want to get them to a spring practice. And then when they get them to spring practice, the next step is either the spring game or to a session of their camp. Once they get into a session of their camp, then they have a situation where they want to get them up in August for a practice and a barbecues, things like that they do in August as they're preparing for the season. So, there's kids that they actually target, and they have like a whole system of getting them on campus multiple times, for different events, just so they can be around the program and get that sort of comfort factor. Mark D'Antonio is really big on building rapport with the kids and having them feel comfortable. And I think Curtis Blackwell has sort of developed. He has a name for it. I can't remember what it is, but it's a name for this program about getting kids on campus, throughout the year, multiple times, at different events and different type of situations, so that they can develop that comfort factor with Michigan State University.
And you know what? Watching D'Antonio, when he was on his way over to talk to us Tuesday after practice, he stopped and talked to those kids for a while. He's got a big smile on his face. It's comfortable. It's fun. But he spends time with them. And before they leave, I'm sure they get those photographs like the other recruits do. And those 8th graders go home and they show mom and dad those photos of them with the coach. And all of a sudden, mom and dad of these 8th graders are like, holy crap, my son is right in the middle of all this stuff now. And that can resonate. That's a great place for Michigan State to start, I would think, theoretically, with some of the recruits, and I give D'Antonio credit for being open-minded and going ahead and he enjoys his time, as he says, with young people. I mean, he's not just like, just like going through the motions. He's talking to them. Where do you play? You guys play for the Buccaneers? He knows all the teams in the PAL and the Police Athletic League and all that. And, for instance, I like John L. Smith as a guy, as a pretty fun guy and stuff. Not a bad coach in some respects. John L. would have never gone for that. He would have thought that was a complete gimmicky waste of time. Harbaugh, I doubt it. He's probably too good for that. Maybe not. I'm not sure. Maybe they don't need it. But again, that's another part of the market. Michigan State, I don't want to say they're cornering it, but getting off to a good start there. And I think it's smart. And I think that's pretty effective for them right now. And I guess that's it. I had some other things I was going to touch on, but we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. Frankly, I can't remember the other things I was going to say. But anyway, that'll pretty much do it. But with Josh Jackson, the basketball recruit, I don't know if you had your eye on the McDonald's All-American game last night. I suspect Hunter Rising probably did. He's a basketball guy. And Michigan State was getting a lot of positive publicity, as much as anybody, that night, because they had 2 guys that were committed that were playing and doing a good job. And the one star of the game is an uncommitted guy who's looking at Michigan State and a very bright, interesting personality. I remember you asking me about Josh Jackson 3 or 4 years ago. You're like, Jim, the number 1 player in the country is from Detroit Consortium High School. What's going on with this guy? I think you were wondering why we hadn't had articles on him. I'm like, man, Michigan State doesn't have a chance for that guy. It's like 9th grade, 10th grade. And then, he got swept up, and, Under Armour used him as one of their cornerstone guys for one of their teams that his mom founded, and moved him out of state, out to California, and he was kind of untouchable for a long time. But Michigan State just kept, just showing up at his games, showing up, not groveling at his feet. They didn't make it a Chris Webber recruitment, or a Shane Battier recruitment. They weren't saying, "Hey man, you got to come to Michigan State." Izzo just kept, went to the Final Four, went to the Elite Eight, winning games. Draymond Green, Brandon Dawson, a lot of good photo ops, and he's showing up, and the kid grew up a Michigan State fan. And sooner or later, he just kind of boomeranged back to Michigan State. Now, Kansas, of course, is in there strong. Arizona looks like they've fallen off the pace a little bit. And Michigan State's going to finish with this one. And, they got to, it looks 50-50 to me, depending on every 12 hours. It seems to teeter-totter back and forth. And we've been talking about it on the Final Forum for the last couple of weeks. And, 3 or 4 weeks ago, it looked really good for Michigan State when he visited. And he told the Michigan State people he loved it and wanted to be there. Has some things to work through with his mom, not unlike the Malik McDowell situation, and it's been reported that way. And from what I understand, it's very similar to that. So Michigan State's got to overcome some things there. Does Josh Jackson, want to stand up and say, "This is what I'm going to do"? Izzo has pretty much told him, "Hey, I just want you to be happy." And Izzo's communication with him has been it's been difficult, but he's got some other people he can talk to find out what's going on with that whole thing. So. The fact that last night he announced that he will be making his decision at a press conference in Detroit was, I think, a big a positive blow for Michigan State. Miles Bridges did that. He went to prep school in West Virginia, came back to Flint to make his decision. Josh Jackson going to prep school out in Napa Valley. He's coming back to Detroit to make his decision. His girlfriend will be able to be there at that decision. I'm sure Cassius Winston and all those guys will be doing it too. So that looks like a positive trend for Michigan State for sure. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. But I tell you what, Matt, last night watching the McDonald's All-American game, the Middle Tennessee State game, we tried to cover that. We did a pretty good job there, tried to figure out how to analyze that thing. And, I honestly, they lose. My son was just bothered by it, that they lost to Middle Tennessee State. Me, hey, I got to spend Easter with my family. It's the first time in a couple years I've been able to do that. There's a silver lining to everything. I've been, I've been able to get home, play some catch with my kids a little bit more, played some basketball with my daughter, things I wouldn't be able to do if they were still winning. That's my business, no one else's. Everyone else wants them to keep winning. However, there is that part, because they are good kids. I don't want to be green and white rah-rah guy rooting for Michigan State, but there's no question I root for the people. I like Tom Izzo. I root for him. I like Denzel Valentine. I root for him and Matt Costello. It's bothersome to see him go out like that. And, it kind of hurts a little bit. But I tell you what, whatever hurt I might have had, professionally or unprofessionally, went away last night when I was watching Josh Jackson and Langford and Bridges, and I started putting together the lineup of what it might be next year. I'm like, man, when is Alvin Ellis going to get on the floor? Kenny Goins, some of these established players, where are they going to find their minutes? You start looking at that thing. Is Aaron Harris going to start? I think he will initially. Is Tum going to start? I think he will initially. I think Schilling starts. I think Davis starts at the 4. I think Bridges comes off the bench. I don't know, but there's some first-round talent mixed in with some venerable veterans. And after watching Josh Jackson, if they get him, he'll be the most talented guy they've signed since Magic Johnson, and it won't be close. It'll be those two and everybody else. They're only going to have him for a year, and they've got to. If they get him, they'll have to, fit into the Izzo system, playing defense, rebounding, running the plays correctly, and those type of things. Will there be more loose play? I don't know. Izzo's going to have to adjust also. But Matt, watching that last night, I got over that Middle Tennessee State game last night.
Well, that's obviously, high praise. Sitting there saying he's the most talented guy, could be the most talented Spartan since Magic Johnson is really high praise when you consider, some of the guys that have come to Michigan State over the years. Jason Richardson was an incredible talent, and Zach Randolph was, just awesome right off the bat. And yeah. Marcus Taylor was, the number one player in the country as well there for a year or two, I think. So, that's definitely some high praise. And yeah, I watched some of the game, and, watching the dunk by Miles Bridges was cool to see, and that was all over Twitter. And the future could be really, really bright. I will play, devil's advocate, and I'll sit there and toss out the idea that the only thing is with getting all these talented, freshmen, is you could end up with a situation, and obviously losing Bess and Clark, it's all of a sudden, what if Jackson and Bridges decide to leave after 1 year? Yeah. Deontay Davis leaves. Schilling's going, Harris is going as well,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, you're left with this sort of just a huge gap because you've lost Bess and Clark, and you're losing, the seniors, you're losing the sophomore, you're losing the freshman. You could have a situation where all of a sudden Michigan State has, like 7, scholarship spots open, for the 2017 season. So, so I guess it's one of those things that it's uncharted territory, and I guess that's what happens when you go out and recruit a class like Kentucky has or Duke has, this would obviously be. They've had some great classes, but this would be sort of historic, as you pointed out.
Yeah, Michigan State's got a chance to do it, and they didn't really set out to do it. It just kind of fell in. I don't want to say fell in their lap. There's a lot of groundwork that was laid, but I mean, Michigan State tried to do this a couple of years ago with the Alexander kid and Okafor and Tyus Jones and Jabari Parker, and didn't finish on any of them. Ended up with Tum Tum and Schilling and some other pretty good players, but have gone to a Final Four with some of those guys. But then this thing just kind of fell in their lap a little bit, and they got a chance to finish this one out. And I was talking to Izzo about it on Saturday, and he said, like what you're talking about, the way he described it is, you almost have to make a decision. Are you going to go in that direction? Are you a little bit pregnant or pregnant? You can't be one or the other. Are you going to go for these guys and a lot of one and dones and have to change your program to deal with that all the time, or do you kind of settle in with what they've had and maybe mix in once in a while a Brandon Dawson, one of those guys, but maybe not 4 of them? This will be new territory for Michigan State, not only with young talent like this, but what happens immediately after that in terms of ones and dones, because Deontay Davis is going to be leaving too, I would imagine, after his second year, if he does come back, which I expect him to. So he was talking about that on Saturday after watching Cassius Winston have a great state championship game. He's like thinking what you're thinking, Do you change your whole program to be chasing that stuff all the time, the way Kentucky and Duke have been, in Kansas to an extent? And I don't think he thinks it's ideal, but I don't know where that's all headed. You can even set out to be that way, and then you get it done this year, but then you might have a couple years where you don't get it done, and then where are you? He had an interesting conversation with a former college coach that had been to some Final Fours, and he said, you know what, Izzo? He said, guys like us, we might be better off if the NBA went back to the old rule and you just let these guys go pro early. Don't make them go to college for a year, because these guys that go to college for a year, there's a big drop off between you have your top 5 or 6 players, but then from number 7 to number 25, not a big difference. So the top 6, they're going to Kentucky and Duke won a national title with a couple of them last year. And, Kentucky's been bouncing around. They won one 3 years ago. They've not dominated like they thought they would. But this coach told Izzo, guys like us, we'd be better off if those guys didn't go to Kentucky and Duke. And those guys all went to the pros. And then, Michigan State, my school, your school, we just take what's left between number 7 and 25 and just roll the dice and see what happens. And, Michigan State might have a better chance with something like that. And Izzo's like, you know what, you're probably right. When you think about allowing some of these top players to go to college for 1 year, does not help. Michigan State's a power program, but it's not Duke, and it's still not North Carolina, and it's not Kentucky. Now, North Carolina doesn't necessarily have one and dones, but they do have 6 McDonald's All-Americans, which is more than anybody else. And I think they're gonna close it out this year and win that one. But it's a lot of fun. McDonald's All-American game. I suspect Hunter Rison was watching that one, and it was good publicity for the university on that day. Today, Denzel Valentine named Associated Press Player of the Year. So basketball helping football. And all the way around, we'll be covering recruiting like we have been in the coming days, because there's still some news on tap for Michigan State. Matt, any closing thoughts?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, we'll obviously with Rocky Lombardi and Hunter Rison and some other guys on campus, stay tuned to the underground bunker. We'll have any analysis, and I'm sure if there's some news that breaks, and usually nowadays stuff breaks via Twitter, but we'll sort of be following that stuff and provide some insight to how it impacts Michigan State and as far as the recruiting class going forward. And right now, I think Michigan State's doing a great job as far as spring evaluation. I also think they're being very pragmatic with the guys that they're actually going after. And there's guys that they haven't offered yet, which is really they're not in a hurry. I don't think they're in a hurry to get 20 commitments like they were last year. I think D'Antonio wants to sort of take time a little bit more this year. So, but it's an exciting time for Michigan State. Obviously, a lot of, Michigan State has a lot to sell, and with what they have, and despite what the national media, the love affair with Jim Harbaugh and everything, Michigan State's still getting it done and bringing in some outstanding prospects.
All right, let's bring in Tim O'Halloran, better known as Edgy Tim, in recruiting circles around the Midwest, certainly in the great state of Illinois. Tim, thanks for coming on today. Of course, big news out of the land of Lincoln. Do you guys still call it the land of Lincoln?
We might start calling it the land of the Spartan if this keeps up.
All right. Kevin Jarvis, offensive lineman, Park Ridge, Illinois, Maine South High School, 4-star, 6'5", 315, committed to Michigan State earlier today. I know you had your ear to the ground on this one pretty good. You saw this one starting to slant toward Michigan State in the last few days, didn't you?
Yeah, actually, I'd even say maybe the last few weeks I had a real nice talk with Kevin a couple weeks ago, and just kind of laid it out there at this time of year. You want to know, well, what's your plan? And he talked about, there were a couple other schools that certainly had it that he was interested in, but then whenever he talked about Michigan State, there was always you just noticed he got really excited about them. And you've been doing this long enough as well, Comp. You just kind of get that feeling, that instinct that, there's something going on there with him at Michigan State. And he tried to play his cards pretty close to the vest, but, within the last few days, you just had the feeling. As soon as he told me he was going up there for the visit on Tuesday, I just had a feeling that I actually was surprised he didn't commit on the spot. I was actually surprised he came back and thought it over a little bit. But, hey, he committed, and terrific pickup for Michigan State, no question.
Now, you've been watching him for a while. He's ranked the number 5 player in Illinois right now. He's a 4-star. What kind of player, kind of prospect is he? What have you heard about high school coaches and college coaches that have coached with him or against him? What's the word on Kevin Jarvis? What kind of player?
He's mean.
Yeah.
And I mean that in the best possible sense. I found it very ironic that he took a picture when he was on his visit with one of the Allens. I believe it might have been Jack or Brian. I wasn't sure. But, same kind of attitude, same kind of mentality. I think the best way to describe Kevin is, I've been talking to him for quite a while and was talking to him during the season last year. And, he seemed like one of these kids that every time I talked to him, I was getting 1- and 2-word sentences out of him. And believe me, I think you can relate more than anyone. Those are always fun interviews to do.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of thinking, man, what's with this kid? Just kind of a jerk, honestly. And so I kind of hung in there, and because me, Comp, now it's a challenge.
Yeah.
So I got to get something out of this kid. And once the season ended, and all of a sudden it was like a completely different kid. And I'm like, wow, whatever. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden he's just great to talk to, and just just a terrific kid. And so I asked him, I said, what was the deal during the season? And he kind of apologized. He goes, hey, Ed, I'm telling you, once the season's there, I am locked in. He's like, you know what? Same goes with school, same goes with everything else. He goes, my focus is school and my season and my team and football, and that's the kind of mentality he brings to the table. I mean, this is a kid that is intense and plays intense, and he's a second-level, third-level blocker. And, I love him as a player. To me, the most interesting thing with him is, he's 6'5", 315. It's about as legit as I've seen on the eyeball test. He's got enough quickness to play guard. I think if needed, he can also play tackle. So, again, just kind of very talented, very versatile kid that can maybe fill a spot or two for you if needed.
You like those edgy guys, don't you?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's you deal with a lot of these kids over the years. I've been doing it over 20 years, and you have the athlete types, and then you have the football players. And if you can find a kid with the physical attributes, Kevin Jarvis, by the way, happens to be a football player, I just think I think it's a part of the evaluation process that I've always used, and I would say either an advantage or just a benefit of getting to know one specific area. You get to know these kids, and you kind of get that feel that hey. This is the type of kid that loves football. And I don't know, Cop, maybe you know this as well. I mean, how many kids over the years have you talked to, you wonder, really love football?
Yeah, it happens. There are some that have the frame and the skills but aren't really in love with it. And, I watched Jarvis's film tonight for the first time tonight, And, prior to that, I saw the smiling photographs of him from his visit with Mark D'Antonio and Jack Allen. Smiling, nice guy. I saw him come off the practice field on Tuesday, as a matter of fact, here at East Lansing. Of course, could not talk to him then, but seemed like a smiling, happy guy. Then I turned on his film. I'm like, that doesn't look like the smiling guy I saw. Like you're talking about planting guys into the ground, blocking them off the screen, or if he's not blocking them off the screen, takes some joy in planting their back to the turf and popping up to his feet, happy, wagging his tail that he just dominated somebody. I can see what you're talking about being mean, when you said mean is the first thing that came to your mind. Well, what about Michigan State and what they're doing in Illinois and in the Chicagoland area? I was just doing some math before I called you, and just looking at 4-star recruits in the state of Illinois since 2013, and I can't remember. Let's see, Michigan State. I can't remember if I counted.
It's a tremendous number, that I do know, and what's impressed me the most is it's a consistently good number. Sure, there's been a year or two where maybe you haven't gotten quite the amount of numbers, but I thought the last class kind of told it all for you guys. I had you getting 3 out of my top 5 in state, and cleaned up in a position that might have been one of the strongest positions. Of course, talking about D-line, maybe one of the strongest positions for that spot that we've had here in many, many years. And your guys do it the right way, Tom. That's how they get it done. It's no smoke and mirrors. It's no BS. They don't lead kids on. They're very straightforward. They offer them when they feel that, it's time to offer. And if they're recruiting them, they don't offer. They're very honest, and that's what every kid up and down the line will tell you. Just very straightforward, very honest in the process, and it works.
And this is something we had not seen covering Michigan State for years and years. As a matter of fact, Illinois, Chicago was an area that had been a blind spot for Michigan State recruiting for years. Now, Michigan State's football program had gone up and down during those times, but even during the up times, didn't get much out of Illinois for years. I think Terry Love was a guy that got once.
Yep.
Just occasionally, you go back to Hubert Thompson, Jay Saylor at the beginning of the Nick Saban era. But like you, I've covered this for a long time, and Michigan State was perpetually changing their Chicago recruiter. It was a new guy every 3 years, and they could never get their hooks planted. Dan Roshar was a guy that started to make some progress in 2013, and always got a lot of visits, but didn't quite ring the bell. He finally got the kid Demetrius Cooper out of Chicago in 2013, a 3-star. Then Roshar left to go coach the Saints. They brought in Ron Burton, who is a tremendous recruiter, had never recruited this area before, but had done well in Texas for Air Force Academy, which is a difficult place to recruit to. You turned them loose with a Big Ten school in Chicago, and Ron Burton was good. Brad Salem came into the Chicago area to assist him, and things changed right away in 2014. I think that Roshar laid a lot of that foundation, but 2014, all of a sudden, there were 16 4-star recruits in Illinois by Rivals.com rankings, and Michigan State landed 2 of them. They got Brian Allen and Enoch Smith. Then they got 3 stars, Chase Yanakakos and Matt Morrissey. Now that was before the Rose Bowl run. Michigan State that year lost out to Jamarco Jones to Ohio State. That one went down to the wire. And they lost out to Northwestern with Parker Westfall. I'm not sure that was quite full blast, but Michigan State liked him. 2015, they got Raekwon Williams, number 2 in Illinois, 4-star out of Chicago DePaul Prep. As I remember, it was head-to-head against Iowa. Michigan State went down to the wire in the summer with Notre Dame for Miles Boykin, wide receiver out of New Lenox Providence Catholic. And then last summer, coming off Rose Bowl, Cotton Bowl, a lot of that flywheel was starting to turn for them and for Burton and for Salem and D'Antonio. And Michigan State landed 4 of the top 6. There were 8 4-star recruits in the state of Illinois that year. Michigan State got half of them. Naquan Jones, Josh King, Kenny Like, Mike Panashuk. Some of those guys moved up to 4-star after their commitment to Michigan State. I think there might be a bump associated with that based on Michigan State's success. But Josh King, he was a big-timer everybody liked. Naquan Jones, people, a lot of schools liked him. But the thing with Josh King, I didn't detect anyone really coming close with Michigan State. Notre Dame was in there a little bit, but Josh King, these guys committing in the summer. Kenny Like never really considered anyone else. Mike Panashuk, I'm not sure considered anyone else. Naquan Jones committed, decommitted, opened it back up, but I'm not sure he really considered anyone else. These are TKO recruiting jobs. This is not like a lot of down to the wire with some of these. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. And I think what gets lost in the equation out here quite a bit is, It's almost, especially last year, it was almost kind of a perfect storm. You have a school in Illinois, let's face it, it's been a train wreck. From recruiting standpoint, from the coaching standpoint, I mean, hey, you guys see everything that's going on over here. It's been an absolute mess. So you've got that to deal with. Northwestern, unfortunately, or fortunately for them, you take maybe the top 10 in Chicagoland, you can automatically eliminate at least 7 of those top 10 kids because of academics. So then you're fighting that battle if you're Northwestern. So they've been very limited, especially last year in that class. They had very few kids. I don't believe they signed anyone from Chicagoland. And quite honestly, there weren't a whole lot of kids that they could bring in to qualify. So just, you've had that going on, and for years you get people saying, oh, you've got to lock up the state. Look, no one's ever going to lock up this state. This state is too accessible. You can be in the SEC, you can be in the Pac-12. You fly into O'Hare at Midway, you can hit a dozen schools and be out by the end of the day. You're, maybe 4.5 hours from Michigan State, 3 hours from Madison, 3 hours from Iowa. Heck, I'm closer to Purdue than I am Illinois. So, just from that fact alone, you're never going to quote-unquote lock up the state, and I think Michigan State has definitely taken advantage of that, and it's certainly has benefited.
All right, just looking at the numbers, 4-star recruits in the state of Illinois since 2013. Michigan State with 7 commitments. I was trying to do the math to see whether I even counted Kevin Jarvis in that. I've got 4, 5, 6, 7.
Oh, there's going to be more coming.
Jarvis,
I don't think there's any doubt.
Jarvis is number 8. I got Michigan State with 8 if you count Jarvis. Yeah, this does not count this year's class. Just the last 4 classes prior to Jarvis. Michigan State leading the way with 7 4-star recruits in the state of Illinois over the last 4 years. They've got 7. Northwestern with 4, Notre Dame with 4, Michigan with 3. And then you've got a handful of schools with 2 4-star recruits. LSU, Tennessee, Nebraska, Pittsburgh, Illinois, Missouri. And then a handful of schools with 1. And it's Ohio State, Vanderbilt, Ole Miss, USC, Oklahoma, Iowa State. To your point, USC and Ole Miss came in and got a couple of 5-stars, but you're not seeing Purdue in there, getting any of these guys. Even Iowa, who's recruited so well in Chicago, and obviously had a great team last year, not doing as much in Chicago lately in terms of the highly recruited guys. So let's talk about this year before I let you go. Kevin Jarvis, number 5. Right now, Rivals.com currently has 5 players that are ranked as 4-star recruits. I would imagine that number will increase a little bit throughout the course of the summer. Kevin Jarvis, number 5. Number 1 player has committed to the Hawkeyes. Speak of the devil. You were about ready to say that, I'm sure. A kid out of Edwardsville, Illinois, A.J. Epineza. Then you've got uncommitted wide receiver from East St. Louis, Jeff Thomas. Uncommitted wide receiver Isaiah Robertson from Naperville. Then number 4, Cole Kmet. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. To Notre Dame. And then number 5, Kevin Jarvis to Michigan State. We see Jacob Panashuk at number 10, a 3-star out of Roselle Lake Park High School. Michigan State's got some interest in him. But with the 2 uncommitted kids, Jeff Thomas, Isaiah Robertson, are you detecting any more interest with Michigan State? What do you see is coming next with these Illinois kids in 2017? Any strong leaders for any of these guys, top 5, top 10, top 15?
Well, I mean, talking Panashuk, that's got to be almost a done deal for Michigan State, in my opinion. Just the fact that his brother's already there, and I think he's doing the right thing. He's waiting to see what happens. But I think when it's all said and done, you're going to get him, and you're going to have both brothers there starting next year. Jeff Thomas, I tell you what, you talk about Illinois and the woes they've had. Missouri keeps pulling kids away from them, and especially East St. Louis kids. The East St. Louis and Missouri had a nice little relationship there, and they pulled in quite a few kids. And everything I keep hearing right now is that Thomas is definitely kind of a lean right now towards Missouri. But again, he's got offers from all over the country, so that could definitely change. Isaiah Robertson's an interesting kid. I actually think he could wind up being a better safety than a wide receiver. I've been trying to make the case that he's an athlete, just tremendously athletic kid. I think most of the bigger schools right now want to see what his 40 time is. A couple of people that I've talked to have they love him, but they just kind of want to see him on a clock. So it'll be interesting to see whether bigger schools, and he's got some good offers, but if bigger schools such as Michigan State come in and really start getting serious and start throwing offers out there. So I think the spring for him could be big. You go back to the number 1 kid, Epineza. That was a legacy thing at Iowa. I don't think anyone really had a chance once he got that very early off from the Hawkeyes. But hey, good for Iowa. As far as the recruiting class in Illinois, it's decent. Obviously last year with Michigan State, you had quite a few defensive linemen. We have a good D-line class, but it's different this year. Last year you had the 6'4", 6'5", lanky, long, athletic. Now we have some of those kids, but maybe not quite the 4-star plus quality. I think what's a little disturbing about this class, and it was kind of the same situation last year, not a lot of tackle bodies here. I don't know if that's a Midwest thing the last few years, but I know certainly here, almost like Chicago deep dish and hot dogs, we're kind of known for offensive tackles. And, those big 6'5", 6'6", lanky kids, we just haven't had a whole lot of them, and there's not a whole lot of them in this class. So that's kind of a negative. But, overall, maybe around the same range as last year, maybe slightly better.
All right. And looking at that top five, I mentioned Jarvis, and one kid's going to Notre Dame, then the other kid's going to Iowa. The other two are wide receivers, and Michigan State not really in a market for wide receivers, not needing to go to Illinois for those guys. It just happens to be, Tim, here in the state of Michigan, the wide receiver classes last year and this year, and even maybe 2 years ago, maybe just last year and this year, the wide receiver talent around here is stronger than ever, so Michigan State doesn't have to go out of state necessarily for those. So those guys, so Michigan State ringing the bell for some of the areas of need there with an offensive lineman and a big-bodied one. Also, real quickly, do you detect an increase in Michigan State buzz when you talk to recruits, when you talk to high school coaches? Has it been gradual, or has it just been like all of a sudden a huge blip? What's it been like in terms of the buzz and the way Michigan State is regarded, maybe by some neutral bystanders in Chicagoland, or even people that have a leaning one way or another? And what would you compare it to? We all remember when Lou Holtz was doing great in Chicago years ago, but is it comparable to when maybe Iowa was at their best? What would you compare it to in terms of Michigan State's recruiting power right now?
That is exactly what I was going to compare it to when Iowa was really clicking here. They had a couple of classes going back on, I'm trying to remember, maybe 2005 or so, where they just kind of I hate using that term, lock up the state, but they did a great job here. And they had that same kind of buzz, and Michigan State has that now. I mean, when you get offered by Michigan State, literally every kid I've talked to, whether they wind up in East Lansing or not, it's a big deal. And it's a good time to be a Spartan out here in Illinois and Chicagoland. I mean, definitely getting a lot of attention. It's an important offer for kids, and like I said, the buzz has just been very positive. And I think another thing that gets lost in the equation is with D'Antonio is the stability. I mean, you see all these changes and everything else. I mean, he's been that one stable factor that I think coaches and parents, they know, hey, this guy certainly seems to be in it for the long run and has shown that so far. And I think that gets lost too. I think it's a big factor a lot of people won't talk about sometimes.
All right, Tim O'Halloran, we really appreciate your insight. We appreciate the article that you wrote. We linked to your site today, and we encourage anyone out there that's a Michigan State fan that's got some friends that like recruiting and have an interest in the state of Illinois. Check out edgytim.com for the best coverage of Illinois recruiting. Make sure you check it out. It's a lot of fun. Edgy Tim, thanks a lot. I appreciate you coming on the podcast, and I'm sure we'll see you this spring at some of the Rivals events and some of the camps out there.
All right, Comp. Always a pleasure, my friend.
Thanks a lot, Tim. For Matt Dorsey, and a special thanks to Edgy Tim, this is Jim Comparoni, publisher of SpartanMag.com, and thank you for listening to the SpartanMag.com Recruiting Wrap podcast.